The crisp, metallic click of the solid gold lighter was the only sound in the cavernous penthouse office. Jackson Hayes, a man who measured his worth in stock tickers and skyline views, didn't even look up from his desk. He simply gestured towards the door, with the lighter, the small flame, dancing like a malevolent spirit. "The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Charlotte. You get nothing. My lawyers will be in touch about the termination." Outside, the rain began to lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the storm breaking inside her. He was talking about their baby, their unborn child, and he was dismissing them both as if they were a failed business venture. She stood there, one hand protectively on her stomach, her world reduced to the cold, indifferent flick of a rich man's thumb. This is the story of how that one callous gesture would unravel an empire and prove that the most powerful currency in the world isn't money. It's a father's love. Life with Jackson Hayes was a meticulously curated performance. Charlotte Vance had once been captivated by it, by him. They met at a gallery opening where one of her architectural sketches was being displayed, a small local event he'd attended on a whim. He'd been charming electric, with a smile that seemed to mint its own currency. He wasn't old money. He was something more potent in the modern world, new money, self-made, and ferociously ambitious. His tech company Nexus Dynamics had disrupted the financial world, and he moved through life with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no. Their courtship was a whirlwind of breathtaking excess. Dinners in Paris just for the evening helicopter rides over the Grand Canyon at sunrise, a private concert with her favorite indie band on their anniversary. He'd showered her with gifts, a vintage Cartier watch, a custom-designed sports car, a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He called her his muse, his anchor in the chaotic world of high-stakes business. Charlotte, an orphan, raised by a quiet, doting father who ran a modest but respected antique bookshop in Vermont, was initially overwhelmed. Her father, Arthur Vance, had been skeptical. "A man who buys that much, Charlotte," he'd said gently over the phone, his voice warm and wise, "is often trying to own something, not love it. Be careful, his price for you isn't your own soul." She had dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned protectiveness. She was in love, or she had convinced herself she was. The penthouse on Park Avenue, with its panoramic views of Central Park, felt like a palace. But over the first 2 years of their marriage, she began to notice the gilding on her cage. Jackson didn't love her passion for architecture. He loved telling people his wife was an architect. He'd funded a small studio for her in the city, but it was more of a showroom for his friends, a testament to his modern sensibilities. When she would get lost in her designs, sketching sustainable community housing projects, he would tap his watch impatiently. "Ellie, darling, the Bainbridges are expecting us. We can't be late. Your hobby can wait." Her friends, the ones from her life before Jackson, slowly faded away. They were too normal, too unambitious for Jackson's circle of venture capitalists and socialites. Her new friends were women with surgically perfected faces and eyes that held the cold, transactional gleam of a stock exchange floor. They didn't discuss books or art. They discussed asset allocation and the best tax havens. The loneliness was a quiet, creeping thing. It found her in the echoing silence of the 10,000-square-foot penthouse when Jackson was on yet another business trip to Singapore or Dubai. She would stand by the vast windows, looking down at the city lights, feeling utterly disconnected from the vibrant life teeming below. Then the miracle happened. A small, fluttering hope that started as a whisper in her soul. After months of trying, she was pregnant. She imagined Jackson's reaction, picturing a crack in his perfect polished veneer. She imagined him dropping to his knees, pressing his ear to her stomach, his voice thick with an emotion that wasn't tied to a stock price or a successful merger. She planned the reveal perfectly. A quiet evening at home, a tiny pair of designer baby shoes in a gift box on his pillow. He came home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and someone else's perfume. He was agitated, pacing the marble floor, barking into his phone about a hostile takeover bid from a rival firm led by the notoriously ruthless Sienna Davenport. "Jackson," she began softly, her heart thumping against her ribs. "Not now, Charlotte," he snapped, not looking at her. "I'm on the verge of the biggest deal of my life. This Davenport woman is a shark. I need total focus." "But this is important," she insisted, holding out the small box. He sighed, an exaggerated theatrical sound of pure annoyance. He snatched the box from her hand and ripped it open. He stared at the tiny white sneakers for a long, silent moment. Charlotte held her breath, waiting for the joy, the surprise, the love. Instead, a chilling coldness crept into his eyes. It was a look she had seen him give a subordinate who had failed him once just before he'd fired him on the spot. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, his voice dangerously low. He tossed the box onto the bed as if it were contaminated. "A baby. Now, do you have any idea what this means?" "It means we're going to be a family," she whispered, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "It means a distraction," he corrected, his voice rising. "It means crying and sleepless nights and a complete derailment of our lives. I'm about to close a 9-figure deal, Charlotte. Our image is one of power, of sleek, unencumbered success. A screaming infant doesn't fit the brand." The cruelty of his words struck her like a physical blow. "The brand Jackson. This is our child." "It's a liability," he spat. "A biological complication. You need to fix this. There are clinics, discreet ones. I'll have my assistant arrange everything." Charlotte stared at him, the man she thought she knew dissolving before her eyes, replaced by a monster clad in a bespoke suit. The love she thought they shared was just another one of his assets, and it was about to be liquidated. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. The warmth vanished from their home, replaced by a frigid, oppressive silence. Jackson treated her like a ghost, his eyes sliding past her, as if she were a piece of furniture he no longer liked. The casual touches, the morning kisses, the shared laughter over breakfast, all gone. He moved into one of the guest suites at the far end of the penthouse, the distance a physical manifestation of the chasm that had opened between them. He began to apply pressure, not with overt threats, but with a series of cold, calculated maneuvers. He'd leave brochures for exclusive restorative clinics in Switzerland on her nightstand. He'd talk loudly on the phone with his lawyers in her presence, using phrases like unforeseen domestic complications and protecting primary assets. His business life, however, was thriving on the adrenaline of his battle with Sienna Davenport and her company, Apex Innovations. Sienna was his equal in ambition and his superior in ruthlessness. She was everything Jackson admired, sharp, beautiful in a severe way, and utterly devoid of sentiment. Charlotte saw pictures of them in financial magazines captioned "Titans at War," but their body language at industry events seemed more like that of co-conspirators. One evening, Jackson hosted a dinner party. It was a strategic event meant to court investors and project an image of unshakable confidence. Charlotte, now 6 weeks pregnant, and battling morning sickness, was expected to play her part. She put on a brave face and a stunning emerald gown, the fabric hiding the very slight swell of her stomach. Throughout the dinner, Jackson was performatively attentive, placing a hand on the small of her back, laughing at her comments. But his eyes were cold, and his touch felt like ice. The guest of honor was Sienna Davenport herself. It was a bold power move on Jackson's part, inviting his chief rival into his home. Sienna was magnetic. She commanded the room with her sharp intellect and even sharper wit. She engaged Charlotte in conversation, her gaze analytical, missing nothing. "Jackson tells me you're an architect," Sienna said, swirling a glass of red wine. "That must be quaint, designing little houses while he designs the future of global finance." "I focus on sustainable community projects," Charlotte replied, her voice steady. "I believe a home should be more than an asset." Sienna smiled, a thin, predatory curve of her lips. "A noble sentiment. But sentiment doesn't fund progress or win wars." She looked from Charlotte's flat stomach pointedly up to her eyes, a silent, knowing challenge. In that moment, Charlotte knew that Sienna was not just a business rival. She was the future Jackson wanted, a future without the complication Charlotte was carrying. After the guests had left, the facade shattered. "You were staring at her all night," Charlotte said, the accusation hanging in the air. "I was studying my competition," Jackson retorted, loosening his tie. "Something you wouldn't understand. Sienna gets it. She understands that sacrifice is necessary for greatness." "And our baby is the sacrifice?" Charlotte's voice trembled. Jackson's face hardened into a mask of cruel resolve. "I spoke to my team. The optics are a disaster. A pregnancy right now suggests a shift in focus domesticity. It suggests weakness. Davenport will use it against me. The board will get nervous. This isn't about the board, Jackson. This is about us. There is no us if my company falters," he roared, his voice bouncing off the marble and glass. "Everything you have, this apartment, your clothes, your fake studio. It's all because of me. Because of my relentless, undivided focus. You are threatening that." He walked over to the bar and poured himself a stiff scotch. He took a long swallow before turning back to her, his eyes devoid of any emotion she recognized. "So I'm giving you a choice, Charlotte," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "It's the life we have, the future I am building, or that thing you are carrying. You make an appointment, and we go back to how things were. Or you can walk out that door with nothing but the clothes on your back. The prenup is absolute. I've made sure of it." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't a choice. It was an execution order. He was asking her to choose between a life of empty luxury and the life of her own child. She looked at this man, this stranger, and the last vestiges of love and hope withered and died. In their place, a cold, hard certainty began to grow. She finally understood her father's warning. Jackson hadn't just bought her things. He had tried to buy her very being, and the price was indeed her soul. Her hand went to her stomach, a primitive, protective gesture. She felt a surge of strength she didn't know she possessed. It was the fierce, unyielding power of a mother. "There's nothing to choose," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tense silence. "I'm keeping my baby." Jackson's face twisted into a sneer of disbelief, then contempt. "Fine," he hissed. "You've made your decision. Don't expect a single penny from me. You're a fool, Charlotte. You're throwing away a kingdom for a crying, pathetic infant." He turned his back on her, dismissing her, already moving on. For him, The transaction was complete. The asset had been written off. Jackson didn't wait. His cruelty was as efficient as his business dealings. The very next morning, while Charlotte was numbly packing a small suitcase with a few personal items, photos of her and her father, her favorite books, her portfolio of architectural sketches, two stern-faced men in dark suits appeared at the bedroom door. Jackson's personal security. "Ma'am," the taller one said, his voice polite but firm. "Mr. Hayes has instructed us to escort you from the premises." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from her chest to her cheeks. She was being evicted from her own home like a common trespasser. She looked past them down the long, opulent hallway and saw Jackson standing by the elevator phone to his ear, already deep in a business call. He didn't even grant her a final glance. She was walked out of the building. The doorman who had greeted her with a warm smile every day for 2 years, now staring fixedly at a point above her head, his face a mask of professional indifference. Jackson had already cut her out of the narrative of his life, editing her existence with a few swift, brutal commands. Standing on the rain-slicked pavement of Park Avenue, with a single suitcase and the designer clothes on her back, the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She reached into her purse for her phone to call a cab, then pulled out her wallet, her credit cards. The platinum cards Jackson had so proudly given her were gone. She remembered leaving her purse on the kitchen counter that morning. He must have had his staff remove them. She tried her debit card at a nearby ATM. "Card blocked. Please contact your bank." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. He had locked her out of their joint account. She was pregnant, alone, and utterly penniless in the most expensive city in the world. She swallowed her pride, the bitter taste of it filling her mouth, and called the one person she knew she could count on her oldest friend, Maria. Maria was a nurse who lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens, a world away from the gilded prison Charlotte had just fled. Hearing Maria's warm, concerned voice on the other end of the line was the first kindness Charlotte had felt in months, and it broke her. The story tumbled out between choked sobs, a torrent of pain, betrayal, and fear. "You get in a taxi right now," Maria said, her voice fierce with protective anger. "I don't care what it costs, I'll pay for it when you get here. Just come home." "Charlotte, come to me." The following weeks were a blur of survival. Maria's small apartment was a haven of warmth and normalcy. The smell of coffee brewing in the morning, the sound of sitcoms on the television, the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. It was all a stark contrast to the sterile, silent luxury of the penthouse. Charlotte learned the humbling reality of having nothing. She sold the Cartier watch and the few pieces of jewelry she'd had in her suitcase. The money was a lifeline, but it wouldn't last forever. She started looking for work, but being in the early, exhausting stages of pregnancy made it difficult. No architectural firm wanted to hire a new junior designer who would need maternity leave in 6 months. The shame was a constant companion. She had been so proud, so sure of the life she was building. Now she felt like a failure. She spent her days walking through the parks in Queens, her portfolio in her bag, feeling more invisible than she ever had in Jackson's shadow. The world saw a woman who had failed to hold on to her millionaire husband. They didn't see the woman who had chosen her child over a fortune. One evening, staring at her dwindling bank balance, the stark reality of bringing a child into this instability hit her with full force. She couldn't rely on Maria's generosity forever. She needed help, real help. There was only one person left to call: The person she had been avoiding, not out of fear, but out of a deep, painful shame for not heeding his advice. Her father. She had told him a diluted version of the truth, that she and Jackson were separating, that she needed some time. She had downplayed the cruelty, the abandonment, the utter destitution. She hadn't wanted to worry him. Arthur Vance was in his late 60s, and she pictured him in his cozy bookshop in Vermont, surrounded by the quiet dignity of old leather and paper, and she couldn't bear the thought of shattering his peace with the ugly truth of her life. But now she had no choice. For her baby, she had to swallow her pride. With trembling fingers, she dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm and comforting as she remembered. "Charlotte Pumpkin, is everything all right? You sound tired." And just like that, her carefully constructed dam of composure broke. The whole story poured out of her, the pregnancy, the ultimatum, the public eviction, the frozen bank accounts, the terrifying uncertainty of her future. She cried deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a daughter who had finally come home, if only by phone. She expected him to be angry, to shout, to say, "I told you so." Instead, he listened patiently, the silence on his end of the line, profound and heavy. When she finally finished her voice, a raw whisper, there was a long pause. "Is that his full name?" Arthur asked, his voice different now. It was unnervingly calm, stripped of all warmth, and replaced by something that sounded like polished steel. "Jackson Hayes, CEO of Nexus Dynamics." "Yes, Daddy," she whispered, "and he is based in New York." "The company is publicly traded on the NASDAQ." "Yes. Why?" Another pause, this one shorter, more decisive. "Don't you worry about a thing, my dear," Arthur Vance said, and the quiet authority in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "Not the money, not your apartment, not that boy. I want you to rest. I want you to eat well and take care of my grandchild. I will handle Jackson Hayes." "Daddy, what are you going to do?" she asked, a flicker of fear mixing with her relief. "Please don't do anything crazy." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that was completely alien to her. "Crazy? Oh no, Charlotte. I'm going to be perfectly, devastatingly rational. He has made the grave mistake of valuing assets above my daughter. I'm simply going to teach him a lesson in valuation." He hung up, leaving Charlotte staring at her phone, a sense of awe and trepidation washing over her. She had just unleashed something. She had called her quiet, gentle, book-loving father. But the man who had answered at the end of that call was someone else entirely. For Jackson Hayes, the day his world began to fracture started like any other, with a 5 a.m. workout with his personal trainer, a custom-blended kale smoothie, and a market analysis report that put Nexus Dynamics on a trajectory for another record-breaking quarter. He had successfully excised Charlotte from his life with surgical precision. The momentary inconvenience was over. Now he could focus entirely on the acquisition of a smaller, innovative AI firm, a move that would cement his dominance over Sienna Davenport. He felt powerful, unburdened. He strode into the Nexus Dynamics Tower, a gleaming monument of steel and glass in the heart of Manhattan, feeling the familiar rush of being a master of his universe. The first sign of trouble was insignificant, almost laughable. He was at a power lunch with 2 hedge fund managers trying to woo them into backing his next venture. When the bill came a staggering sum he wouldn't even blink at, he handed the waiter his exclusive black-tiered Centurion card. The waiter returned a few minutes later, his expression apologetic. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Hayes. The card has been declined." Jackson frowned. "That's impossible. Run it again." The waiter nodded and left, only to return with the same result. Declined, sir. The message says, card suspended. Contact issuer. A flicker of annoyance. He pulled out a second card, a corporate platinum. That too was declined. Red-faced, he had to ask one of the fund managers to cover the bill, a deep humiliation that soured the entire meeting. He chalked it up to a glitch, a technical error in the bank's fraud detection system. Back in his office, he called his private banker at Sterling Wentworth, a man whose entire job was to cater to his every financial whim. "Robert, what the hell is going on with my cards?" Jackson barked into the phone. Robert sounded flustered, confused. I don't know, Mr. Hayes. I'm looking at your accounts right now, and this is very strange. There's a freeze, a complete administrative lockdown on all your personal assets held by this institution." "A freeze on whose authority?" Jackson demanded, his voice rising. "That's just it, sir. I've never seen anything like it. It's not from a government agency like the IRS or the SEC. It appears to be an internal directive from our highest-level global risk management division, citing unforeseen third-party liabilities. It's completely locked. I can't touch it." A cold knot of dread began to form in Jackson's stomach. This was more than a glitch. He ended the call and tried to log into his personal trading account with a different brokerage. Access denied. He tried to wire money from his corporate account to a personal one. Transaction failed. It was as if a digital wall had been erected around his entire fortune, and he was on the outside looking in. Panic began its insidious creep. His wealth was his identity, his power, his very lifeblood. Without it, he was nothing. He spent the afternoon in a frantic series of calls to his lawyers, his accountants, his board members. No one had an answer. They were all hitting the same impenetrable wall. Whispers started circulating. His CFO called his voice tense. Their main line of corporate credit had been suspended pending a review. The AI acquisition was now in jeopardy. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his opulent office, his private unlisted phone line rang. The caller ID was blocked. He snatched it up. "Who is this?" he snarls. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and carried a weight of immense, unshakable authority. It was the voice of a man who had never had to raise it in his life. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Arthur Vance." Jackson's mind raced. Vance? Charlotte's father? The old man with the dusty bookshop in Vermont? What could he possibly want? Was he calling to plead for his daughter? "Look, if this is about Charlotte, you're wasting your time." Jackson sneered, feeling a surge of arrogant confidence. "She made her choice. The little money you think you can get from me is, let me stop you there, son." Arthur's voice cut through him, the word son dripping with icy condescension. "I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding about who I am. You see, the bookshop is a hobby, a pleasant diversion. It keeps me grounded." A confused silence hung in the air. "My actual work," Arthur continued, his voice as smooth and cold as river stone, "is as the chairman and majority shareholder of Vance Global Holdings." Jackson felt the blood drain from his face. Vance Global. Not a company, but a colossus. A private multinational conglomerate with controlling interests in logistics, banking, and technology across 4 continents. They were a silent giant, rarely in the news because they owned the news outlets. Their influence was the stuff of legend in the highest circles of finance, a force that could move markets with a single, quiet phone call. Sterling Wentworth Jackson's primary bank was one of their smaller subsidiaries. Vance Global Arthur said, as if sensing Jackson's shock has a very strict ethical charter. We do not abide partners who demonstrate a profound character deficit. Your treatment of my daughter Charlotte, who I should mention is the sole heir to my entire portfolio, constitutes such a deficit. Jackson was speechless, his throat suddenly tight and dry. The room felt like it was tilting. The assets you believe are yours, Mr. Hayes, Arthur explained patiently, as if to a child, are all leveraged through institutions that fall under the Vance Global umbrella. Your credit lines, your investment platforms, the very bank that holds your company's capital. They are all in a manner of speaking mine. And as of this morning, I have instructed them to place a temporary but total hold on any account associated with you or Nexus Dynamics. You can't do that. Jackson stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. That's illegal. Arthur Vance laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the sound of a lion observing a mouse. Illegal, Mr. Hayes, when you control the board of the bank that lends you the money. It's called risk mitigation. You, my boy, have suddenly become the highest possible risk. You mistook my daughter for a liability. You are about to learn the meaning of the word. The line went dead. Jackson Hayes stood in the center of his office, the useless phone in his hand, surrounded by the trappings of a fortune he no longer controlled. He was a king in a kingdom that had just been seized by a power he never even knew existed. The bookkeeper from Vermont had just frozen his entire world with a single phone call. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Jackson Hayes, the financial wunderkind, the untouchable titan of tech, became a man trapped in a prison of his own wealth. He was a multi-millionaire on paper, but he couldn't afford to buy a cup of coffee. The first 24 hours were a blur of rage and denial. He stormed into the Sterling Wentworth headquarters the next morning, demanding to see the bank president, a man he had golfed with just last month. He was stopped by security in the lobby. A junior vice president was sent down to meet him, a nervous young man who couldn't meet his eye. Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry, but your accounts are under an executive review, the man mumbled, sweating under Jackson's glare. There's nothing we can do at this branch level. Executive review, I am an executive client, Jackson roared, causing heads to turn in the marble-floored lobby. My company has over $100 million in assets with you. Yes, sir, the man said, flinching. And for now, that's where they'll stay. Humiliated, he retreated. He called an emergency board meeting at Nexus Dynamics. He tried to project calm, to spin the situation as a temporary liquidity issue, a hostile, short-seller attack. But the board members were sharks. They could smell blood in the water. News of their primary credit line being frozen had already spread. The stock price for Nexus Dynamics had begun to wobble. The AI acquisition, the deal that was meant to be his crowning achievement, was the first major casualty. The smaller firm's CEO called him personally. Jackson, he said, his voice flat. We're invoking the financing contingency clause. Your funding is no longer secure. We're pulling out of the deal. We've had another offer. Another offer from who? Jackson demanded. Apex Innovations. Sienna Davenport. Her funding is ironclad. The betrayal was a sharp physical pain. Sienna. Of course. She hadn't hesitated to move in for the kill. He tried calling her a desperate, humbling act. She took the call, her voice oozing mock sympathy. Jackson, darling, I heard you're having some cash flow problems, she purred. Such a shame. If you'd gotten rid of your little domestic distraction sooner, perhaps you would have been more focused. She hung up. His world began to shrink with terrifying speed. His corporate expense account was shut down. The lease on his company's fleet of luxury cars was suspended. He had to take a yellow cab home from the office, a mortifying experience he hadn't had in a decade. When he arrived at his penthouse, the concierge stopped him. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry. There's an issue with the building fees. The automatic payment was declined." He was locked out of his own home, forced to spend the night in a mid-range hotel paying with the last few $100s of cash he had in his wallet. The stark, impersonal room with its scratchy blankets and faint smell of disinfectant was a brutal mockery of his former life. Desperation began to gnaw at him. His friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at exclusive clubs and eagerly accepted his invitations to yacht parties, were suddenly unavailable. Calls went to voicemail. Texts were left unread. In the world he inhabited, financial trouble was a contagious disease, and no one wanted to be near the infected. Stripped of his money, he was also stripped of his power, his charm, his very identity. He looked at his reflection in the cheap hotel mirror. The bespoke suit was wrinkled. His face was pale, his eyes witful with a fear he had never known. He was no longer Jackson Hayes, the master of the universe. He was just a man who had made a terrible, terrible mistake. His thoughts turned to Charlotte, not with remorse, not with love, but with a raw, animalistic need for survival. She was the key. Her father had done this to him. She could make him stop. He had to find her. He had to convince her, manipulate her, beg her if he had to. He would promise her anything, marriage, the baby, a world of luxury, anything to get his life back. He hired a cheap private investigator with his last bit of cash. Finding her was surprisingly easy. The investigator traced her to a small, unassuming apartment building in Queens, registered under the name Maria Sanchez. Jackson drove there in a rental car, a nondescript sedan that felt alien to him. The neighborhood was a vibrant tapestry of cultures, smells, and sounds he had only ever witnessed from the tinted windows of a chauffeured town car. It felt like a foreign country. He stood on the pavement outside her building, a 3-story brick walk-up. It was so normal, so beneath him. He buzzed the apartment, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and contempt. He would fix this. He would turn on the charm, the charisma that had won her over in the first place. He would get his kingdom back. The door buzzed open. The climb up the 3 flights of stairs felt like an ascent into another world. The hallway smelled of garlic and cleaning products, a stark contrast to the custom-scented, climate-controlled corridors of his penthouse. He found apartment 3B and knocked, smoothing his now rumpled suit jacket, trying to compose his features into a mask of sincere regret. The door opened, and there she was. Charlotte looked different. She wasn't wearing designer silks or glittering diamonds. She was in a simple cotton maternity dress. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her feet were bare. But it was her face that struck him. The anxiety and sadness that had clouded her features for months were gone. In their place was a calm serenity, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. She looked healthier, more vibrant than he had seen her in years. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, a gentle, undeniable curve to her belly. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw him, but there was no fear, no flicker of the old adoration. There was only a cool, appraising stillness. "Jackson," she said, her voice even. "What are you doing here?" "Charlotte, thank God I found you." He began, forcing a pained expression onto his face. He tried to step inside, but she didn't move, blocking the doorway. We need to talk. I've made a terrible mistake. A catastrophic mistake. You made a choice, she corrected him, her voice devoid of emotion. Now why are you here? His practiced charm faltered in the face of her composure. He decided to switch tactics to desperation. Your father, Charlotte. He's destroying me. He's frozen everything. My accounts, my company. Everything is gone. I'm ruined. My father is protecting his family, she said simply, something you failed to understand. This isn't protection, it's a nuclear attack, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Please, you have to call him. Tell him to stop. I'll do anything. I mean it. We can be a family. You me the baby. I want that. I see it now. I was just stressed. The deal with Sienna, the pressure. It wasn't me. He reached out to touch her arm, but she recoiled as if from a snake. Don't, she said, her voice dropping a new edge of steel in it. Don't you dare touch me. The rejection stunned him. This was not the pliable, gentle Charlotte he knew. You don't want our baby Jackson. She continued, her gaze unwavering. You want a solution to your problem. You see me as a key, a tool to get your money back. Just like you saw our child as a liability. You haven't changed. You're just desperate. He stared at her, seeing the truth in her words reflected in her clear, honest eyes. She saw right through him, through the lies and the performance, to the hollow, grasping core of the man he was. I loved you, he whispered, a last-ditch attempt at emotional blackmail. Charlotte laughed, a short, bitter sound. No, you didn't. You loved the idea of me. The quiet, artistic wife who looked good on your arm at galas. The woman who wouldn't challenge you. The moment I became a real person with a real non-negotiable need, the need to protect my child, I became inconvenient. And you discard inconvenient things, Jackson. From inside the apartment, Maria appeared behind Charlotte. Her arms crossed, her expression one of pure fury. You heard her, Maria said. Get lost. Jackson looked from Charlotte's resolute face to Maria's protective stance. The game was over. There was no angle left to play. He had no leverage, no power, nothing. He saw his reflection in the window of the apartment door, a desperate, broken man in a cheapening suit. And in that moment, he finally understood. Arthur Vance hadn't just taken his money. He had taken his reflection, his identity, and shown him the ugly, empty reality that lay beneath. You'll regret this, he snarled, the desperation curdling into venom. Both of you. Charlotte simply looked at him with something akin to pity. No, Jackson, she said softly. You're the one who will be living with regret. I'm living with my child. I chose life. You chose money. And it seems you've lost. She closed the door in his face. The soft click of the lock echoed in the hallway, a final, definitive sound. It was the end, not just of their marriage, but of the entire world he had built. He was left alone in the hallway, with nothing but the smell of garlic and the crushing weight of his own choices. Jackson Hayes's fall was as swift and brutal as his rise had been meteoric. Without access to capital nexus dynamics, collapsed like a house of cards. The board, seeing the writing on the wall, forced him out. In a final act of humiliation, the company's remaining assets were acquired for pennies on the dollar by Apex Innovations. A press release announced Sienna Davenport as the new CEO of the merged entity, praising her for her strategic vision and financial stability. Jackson's name was not mentioned. He was forced into personal bankruptcy. The penthouse, The cars, the watches, the art collection, all were seized and liquidated to pay off a fraction of his debts. The fair weather friends, the business associates, the entire ecosystem that had orbited his wealth vanished as if they had never existed. He was a pariah. The financial news outlets that had once celebrated his genius now wrote scathing articles about his hubris and mysterious sudden collapse. He ended up in a small rented room in a run-down part of the city, the kind of place he wouldn't have driven through before. He took a job in sales for a small, struggling software company, cold-calling potential clients. He wore off-the-rack suits and ate his lunch from a paper bag. Every day was a grinding reminder of what he had lost. He would sometimes see Charlotte's name in the society pages, not as a socialite, but in features on emerging architectural talent. Each mention was a fresh twist of the knife. He was haunted not by the loss of his fortune, but by the memory of her quiet strength as she closed the door on him, and the dawning realization that he had thrown away the only thing of genuine value he had ever possessed. For Charlotte, the months after Jackson's visit were a time of quiet blossoming. With her father's backing, she was free from financial worry. But she refused to step back into a life of idle luxury. Arthur, true to his word, had handled everything. He never gloated or said, "I told you so." He simply provided the security she needed to build a life on her own terms. She moved out of Maria's apartment and into a beautiful light-filled brownstone in Brooklyn, one with a garden in the back. She poured her energy into her work, opening a small independent architectural firm, Vance Design Studios. She focused on what she was passionate about: creating beautiful, affordable, and sustainable homes for families. Her designs were innovative and empathetic, and she quickly gained a reputation for her integrity and vision. 5 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Arthur. Holding her son for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers, Charlotte felt a profound sense of peace. All the pain and betrayal she had endured had led her to this perfect, sacred moment. The love she felt for this tiny human was more real, more powerful than any fleeting thrill Jackson's world had ever offered. Her father was a doting grandfather. The reclusive titan of Vance Global was completely undone by his grandson, spending hours simply holding him, his face softened with a love that was pure and unconditional. He would visit her studio not as a powerful chairman, but as a proud father looking at her blueprints with genuine admiration. "You're building a real legacy, Charlotte," he told her one afternoon as baby Arthur slept in his carrier nearby. "Not one of glass and steel that can crumble overnight, but one of brick and heart and family. That's the kind that lasts." Charlotte looked around her studio at the plans for a new community center on her desk, at her beautiful son sleeping peacefully, and she knew he was right. She had been trapped in a gilded cage, believing it was a palace. It took losing everything to realize she had the power to build her own kingdom, one founded not on a cold balance sheet, but on the unshakable foundations of love, resilience, and self-worth. Jackson Hayes had abandoned her, but in doing so, he had set her free. 5 years had passed. 5 years of peace growth and the quiet, joyful rhythms of a life rebuilt. The ghost of Jackson Hayes had long since faded from Charlotte's daily thoughts, relegated to a sad, cautionary chapter in a book she no longer read. Her world was now colored in the vibrant hues of her son's laughter and the satisfying blues of architectural drafts. Arthur Vance Jr., or Ari, as everyone called him, was a whirlwind of joyous energy. At 5 years old, He had his mother's kind eyes and his grandfather's thoughtful curiosity. He was the sun around which Charlotte's universe lovingly orbited. Her firm Vance Design Studios had become a celebrated name in the industry, lauded for its commitment to creating spaces that nurtured communities. She was no longer Jackson Hayes's discarded wife. She was Charlotte Vance, a creator, a mother, a woman whole and happy on her own terms. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Central Park. The leaves were a riot of gold and crimson, and the air was filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts. Charlotte was pushing Ari on a swing, his delighted squeals soaring into the bright blue sky. It was a moment of perfect, uncomplicated happiness. That's when she felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the primitive instinct of being watched. She slowed the swing, her eyes scanning the periphery of the playground. Her gaze landed on a figure standing near an old oak tree, partially obscured by its trunk. A man thin and hunched, wearing a threadbare jacket that was no match for the autumn chill. Even from a distance, even with the years and the hardship etched into his frame, she knew him. It was Jackson. The sight of him sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Her first immediate instinct was a fierce primal wave of protection. She swiftly lifted Ari from the swing, holding him close, her body a physical shield between her son and the ghost from the past. Ari, sensing the sudden tension in his mother, looked up at her with a concerned frown. Jackson took a hesitant step forward, then another. He looked like a stray dog, starved and uncertain, expecting to be kicked. The arrogant swagger that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a shuffling, defeated gait. His face was gaunt. His once perfect hair was thinning and unkempt, and his eyes, those once predatory eyes that held the cold gleam of the stock market, were now hollowed out, filled with a profound, soul-deep weariness. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Charlotte," he said. His voice was a hoarse rasp, as if it hadn't been used for years. "What do you want, Jackson?" she asked, her tone flat and cold. She held Ari's hand tightly, ready to scoop him up and run. "I don't want anything," he said, quickly raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Not money, not anything from you. I know I don't have the right." He looked past her, his gaze falling on Ari, who was peeking out from behind his mother's legs. A look of such raw, agonizing pain crossed Jackson's face that Charlotte almost flinched. It was the look of a man seeing the vibrant, breathing embodiment of his life's greatest mistake. I had to see him," Jackson whispered, his eyes welling up. "Just once. I work as a custodian in a building a few blocks from here. I saw you walking this way. I just wanted to see his face." Charlotte's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The anger was still there, a hot ember that would never fully extinguish. This man had tried to erase her son from existence. He had called him a complication and a liability. But seeing him now so thoroughly broken, stripped of all artifice and power, the anger was tempered by a sliver of something else. Not pity, but a stark recognition of his profound and utter ruin. "He's beautiful." Jackson choked out a single tear, tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "He looks happy." "He is happy," Charlotte said, her voice firm. "He has a grandfather who adores him. He has friends. He is loved and he is safe. No thanks to you." The words hit him like a physical blow. He nodded, accepting the truth of them without argument. "I know. I deserve this. All of it. I was a monster." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small, clumsily wrapped object. It looked like a cheap toy car from a corner store. I bought this for him, for his birthday. I know it's not for a few months. Can you just give it to him? You don't have to say who it's from. This was the moment of decision. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him to take his pathetic gift and disappear forever. How dare he try to insert himself, even in this small, pitiful way, into the perfect world she had fought so hard to build. But then she looked at Ari, whose wide, innocent eyes were fixed on the broken man. One day her son would ask about his father. He would be curious. What would she tell him? That his father was a monster who tried to destroy them. Yes, that was true. But what would Ari see when he looked at his own reflection? Would he see a piece of that monster in himself? She couldn't give him that burden. With a deep breath, Charlotte made a choice. It was not for Jackson. It was for Ari. No, Jackson, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. You can't buy your way back, not even with a small toy. His face fell, his last hope crumbling. But, she continued, her voice regaining its strength, one day he is going to ask me about you. And I want to be able to tell him that his biological father, the man who made a terrible mistake, finally learned what it meant to be a decent human being. She stepped forward, keeping Ari slightly behind her. I don't want your gifts, and you are not going to be a part of his life. Not now. Maybe not ever. But if there is any sliver of a chance, it starts with you. Fix yourself. Not your finances. You. Get a real job. Find some stability. Learn what integrity is. Become a man your son wouldn't be ashamed of. She pulled a card from her wallet. It was for a charitable foundation run by Vance Global that specialized in job training and placement for people trying to rebuild their lives. This is not a handout, she said, holding it out to him. It's a door. What you do when you walk through it is up to you. That is the only thing I will ever give you. He stared at the card, as if it were a lifeline. With a trembling hand, he took it. Thank you. He whispered the words, barely audible. Don't thank me, Charlotte said, her gaze like steel. Earn it. Without another word, she took Ari's hand and turned her back on Jackson Hayes. She walked away without looking back, leaving him standing alone under the golden leaves of the oak tree, clutching a tiny card that represented not forgiveness, but a final, unexpected chance at redemption. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the courage in your heart. Charlotte faced the ultimate betrayal, but found her power not in revenge, but in choosing a new beginning for herself and her child. She proved that integrity and love are assets that can never be frozen or liquidated. If her journey of resilience and the quiet, devastating power of a father's love resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it, and share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength and justice. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next real-life drama. Your support helps us continue to bring these compelling stories to you. Thank you for listening.
They whispered that she was a shadow, dull, plain, and utterly forgettable, a beige background character in the vibrant movie of high society. When Ethan Cole discarded his wife, Luna, like an out-of-season coat. He didn't just break her heart. He mocked her very existence. He replaced her with a woman who shone like a diamond, convinced he had finally upgraded to the life he deserved. But Ethan forgot one crucial rule of the elite. True power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits patiently in the dark. Tonight, at the city's most exclusive gala, the man who thought he knew everything is about to learn that his plain ex-wife isn't just a survivor. She is the empire he's been trying to impress all along. And she hasn't come for revenge. She's come for justice. The ink on the divorce papers was arguably the darkest thing in the room. It sat there, wet and final, a stark contrast to the aggressive beige and sterile chrome that defined the penthouse apartment Ethan Cole had so carefully curated. It was a space designed to impress, not to comfort. A showroom of success devoid of warmth, much like the marriage that was currently dissolving on the imported mahogany coffee table. Luna Vance sat on the edge of the designer sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. She wore a charcoal cardigan that was 2 sizes too big, swallowing her slender frame, and a long, nondescript skirt that brushed her ankles. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun, with loose strands framing a face devoid of makeup. To the outside observer, and certainly to her husband, she looked like a smudge on a pristine canvas, an error to be corrected. "It's not just about us falling out of love, Luna," Ethan said, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. He didn't look at her. He was watching the London skyline, checking his reflection in the glass to ensure his tie was perfectly dimpled and his silhouette looked imposing against the city lights. "It's about trajectory, alignment." Luna remained silent. Her silence had always been her armor, a fortress she retreated into when the world became too loud, though Ethan mistook it for vacancy. She watched him, really looked at him, the sharp jawline she used to kiss, the ambitious eyes that once looked at her with affection, now cold and calculating. He turned, flashing that practiced, shark-like smile that had charmed venture capitalists and socialites alike. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look at me. Look at where I'm going. The merger with Rhodes Corp is happening next month. I need to be seen at the opera, at the galas, on the yachts in Monaco. I need a partner who can hold a room, who commands attention just by breathing, not one who hides in the corner reading paperback novels while I network." "I never stopped you from going to those things, Ethan," Luna said softly. Her voice was steady, lacking the hysteria I seemed to be bracing for. "I supported you. I edited your speeches. I waited up for you." "But you don't fit," he snapped, his mask slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal pure irritation. "God, look at you. You're just so plain. It's embarrassing, Luna. When I walk into a room, I want heads to turn. I want envy. With you, I get pity." They wonder why Ethan Cole, the rising star of fintech, is dragging around a librarian who looks like she shops at charity bins. He walked over to the table, opened a sleek checkbook, and scribbled furiously. He ripped the page out and slid it across the polished wood. "This is generous," he said, his tone shifting back to business casual, treating her like a redundant employee. "More than the prenup stipulated. Consider it a severance package for 3 years of whatever this was. Buy yourself some new clothes. Get a makeover, or don't. It doesn't matter anymore." Luna looked at the check. £50,000. To him, it was a go-away fee, a rounding error in his accounts. To the Luna he thought he knew, the orphan from the foster system, the quiet girl he'd met in a coffee shop before his career exploded, it was a fortune. It was supposed to be the thing that saved her. But Luna didn't reach for it. She looked up, her hazel eyes catching the late afternoon light. For a moment, there was something in them, a flash of steel, a depth of cold fire, a history of resilience that he had never bothered to read, that made Ethan pause. The air in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. But the moment passed, and she was just plain Luna again. "You're leaving me for her, aren't you?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Ethan sighed, feigning exhaustion, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Sienna isn't the reason. She's just a catalyst. She understands this world. She was born for it. She challenges me. She pushes me to be better, bigger. She's 22, Ethan, and she thinks equity is a horse-riding term." "She is vibrant," Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on the table, the crystal vase rattling. "She is alive. She is everything you refuse to be. Just sign the papers, Luna. Stop dragging this out. Go back to your books and your invisible life. Let me fly." Luna picked up the pen. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She signed her name, Luna Vance, with a precise, elegant hand, the loops of her signature looking almost regal. "Keep the check," she said, standing up. She looked taller than he remembered, her posture straightening as if a heavy weight had been lifted. "No, don't be a martyr," Ethan sneered, annoyed by her refusal to play the victim. "You have nothing. No family, no career, no connections. You'll be on the street in a month without this." "I have enough," she said enigmatically. She walked to the door, her movements graceful and silent. She paused with her hand on the brass handle. She didn't look back. "Goodbye, Ethan. I hope the altitude up there is worth the lack of oxygen." The door clicked shut with a soft finality that echoed louder than a slam. Ethan stared at the unsigned check, a flicker of unease settling in his gut. Why hadn't she cried? Why hadn't she begged? But then his phone buzzed, breaking the spell. It was a text from Sienna. "Wearing that red dress you bought me. Champagne is on ice. Hurry home, Tiger. XOXO." The unease vanished. He tore the check in half and dropped it in the bin. He was free. The dead weight was gone. He was finally ready to ascend to the godlike status he believed he was destined for. 2 years later. The air in the master suite smelled of expensive perfume, hairspray, and mounting desperation. Ethan Cole adjusted his tuxedo jacket, frowning at the mirror. The stress lines around his eyes had deepened over the last 24 months, carving canyons into his youthful face. The merger with Rhodes Corp had gone through, yes, but the market was volatile. His lifestyle, the penthouse, the Aston Martin, the trips to the Maldives, the private memberships, and, most significantly, Sienna, was burning through cash faster than he could generate it. He was a hamster on a wheel made of gold, running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. "Does this look too sheer?" Sienna Rain emerged from the walk-in closet, spinning in a whirlwind of crimson silk. She was undeniably beautiful, blonde, statuesque, and possessing a laugh that could shatter glass. She was the trophy Ethan had wanted, the ornament that proved his success. She was a walking Instagram filter, but ornaments, he was learning, were heavy to carry. "It's fine," Ethan muttered, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "We need to leave in 10 minutes. The traffic to the Shard will be a nightmare, and we can't be late." "It's not just fine, Ethan," Sienna pouted, checking her makeup in the vanity mirror for the 10th time. "This is the Obsidian Gala. Everyone will be there. The board of directors, the investors, the Vancrofts." Ethan stiffened at the name. The Vancroft Estate. For the last 6 months, rumors had swirled through London's financial district like a storm warning. The re-emergence of the Vancroft dynasty. A recluse billionaire family that owned half of the real estate in Europe and significant shares in practically every major tech firm, including Ethan's own company, was finally stepping back into the public eye. Specifically, the sole heiress was taking the reins. No one had seen her face. She was the ghost of the city, a phantom figure in boardrooms. But tonight, she was hosting the Obsidian Gala, a charity event with a buy-in of £10,000 a plate. Ethan needed this night. He needed it like a drowning man needed air. He needed to charm the Vancroft heiress. His company was leveraged to the hilt. If he could secure a partnership or even a public endorsement from the Vancroft estate, he would be bulletproof. If he failed, the house of cards he'd built on debt and arrogance might collapse, burying him alive. "Are you listening to me?" Sienna snapped, snapping a diamond bracelet onto her wrist. "I said, do you think she'll be there? The heiress." "That's the whole point of the night, Sienna," Ethan said, his patience fraying like an old rope. "And I need you to be perfect. No giggling at serious questions. No drinking too much champagne before the speeches. No selfies with the Prime Minister. I need to close a deal tonight." Sienna rolled her eyes, applying another layer of gloss. "You're always closing a deal. You used to be fun, Ethan. Now you're just sweaty and boring." The insult landed, but Ethan ignored it. He looked at Sienna and felt a hollow pang of regret. Not for Luna, never for Luna, he told himself aggressively, but for the peace he used to have. Sienna was a full-time job. She required constant validation, constant spending, constant attention. She was a black hole in a red dress. "Just play the part," Ethan said coldly. "We are the power couple. Act like it." He grabbed his phone and checked his bank balance surreptitiously. It was dangerously low. He had liquidated a significant portion of his portfolio to buy Sienna's necklace for tonight. A massive ruby pendant meant to catch the eye and signal prosperity. It was a gamble. Everything was a gamble now. "Let's go," he said, ushering her out. "And for God's sake, don't mention your Instagram follower count to the chairman of the bank." As the elevator descended, Ethan smoothed his lapels, taking deep, calming breaths. He convinced himself he was ready. He was Ethan Cole. He had shed the dead weight of his past. He was a king entering his court. He had no idea that the guillotine had already been sharpened, the basket was waiting, and the executioner was waiting at the top of the stairs. The ballroom at the Shard was a galaxy of artificial stars. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a prismatic glow over the cream of London society. The view of the Thames below was breathtaking, but no one was looking out the windows. The real view was inside. The air buzzed with the hum of string quartets and the murmur of deals being struck over caviar and truffle-infused canapes. Ethan walked in with Sienna on his arm, immediately scanning the room for targets. His eyes darted from face to face, calculating net worths and influence. "Wow," Sienna whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the opulence. "Look at the flowers. Those are black baccara roses. They cost a fortune. And look at that ice sculpture." "Focus," Ethan hissed through a frozen smile as he waved at a competitor across the room. "We are not tourists." They navigated the crowd, Ethan playing the role of the affable tycoon. He shook hands, laughed at jokes he didn't find funny, and deftly steered conversations toward his company's stock performance. But underneath the veneer, he was sweating. His palms were damp. He felt like an imposter in a room of old money. The whispers began almost immediately. They rippled through the crowd like a wave. They weren't about him. "Have you seen the hostess yet?" "I heard she arrived via private elevator." "They say she bought the building just to host the party." "I heard she's formidable. Toured the Asian markets and ruthlessly cut the dead weight from the family portfolio." "They say she's beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way." Ethan grabbed a glass of champagne, his knuckles white around the stem. He needed to find whoever was in charge. He spotted Damian Rhodes, the CEO of the company he'd merged with, standing near the orchestra. Damian looked relaxed, at ease, everything Ethan wasn't. "Damian!" Ethan exclaimed, approaching him with forced joviality. Wonderful turnout. Truly spectacular. Damien turned, his expression guarded, his eyes scanning Ethan with a critical coldness. Ethan. Sienna. Yes, quite the spectacle. The Vancroft estate doesn't do things by halves. Have you met her? Ethan asked, cutting to the chase, desperate for intel. The heiress? Damien took a sip of his drink, eyeing Ethan with a strange mixture of pity and amusement. I have. Briefly. She's impressive. Very sharp. She knows everything about everyone in this room, Ethan, including you. Ethan preened, straightening his tie. Good. Then she knows my company is the future of the sector. She knows about our Q3 projections. She knows your financials, Ethan, Damien said quietly, leaning in. She knows about the liquidity issues. She knows about the bridge loan. Ethan's stomach dropped. That's confidential. That's temporary. A market correction. If you say so, Damien said, turning away, clearly disengaging from a sinking ship. She's making her entrance in 5 minutes. Main staircase. I'd advise you to be respectful. She doesn't suffer fools, and she has a long memory. Ethan pulled Sienna toward the front of the crowd gathering at the base of the grand staircase. He needed to be seen. He needed to be first in line. He needed to make an impression. My feet hurt, Sienna whined, shifting her weight. Can we sit down? I need a drink. Shut up, Ethan snapped, his eyes fixed on the top of the stairs. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, silencing the 1,000 guests. A hush fell over the room, heavy with anticipation. A single spotlight illuminated the top of the velvet-carpeted staircase. The music swelled, a dramatic, haunting cello piece that resonated in everyone's chest. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. Please welcome your hostess, the chairwoman of the Vancroft Foundation, Ms. Luna Vancroft. Ethan frowned. Luna? Common name. A coincidence, just a cruel coincidence. And then she stepped into the light. The air left Ethan's lungs as if he'd been punched in the gut. The world tilted on its axis. The woman at the top of the stairs was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged a silhouette he didn't recognize. Curved, strong, regal. It flowed around her like liquid night. Diamonds glittered at her throat, real ones, vintage stones worth more than Ethan's entire existence. Her hair, once pulled back in messy buns, cascaded in sleek, dark waves around her shoulders. Her face was made up to perfection, highlighting high cheekbones and eyes that burned with intelligence and power. But it was the face. It was a face he had looked at across a breakfast table for 3 years. A face he had called plain. A face he had laughed at. A face he had discarded. It was Luna. Ethan blinked, sure he was hallucinating. He looked at Sienna, who was staring up with open-mouthed jealousy. He looked back at the woman. She began to descend the stairs. She didn't walk. She glided. Every step was a declaration of power. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was scanning it. She was the queen, and they were her subjects. And then her eyes locked onto his. There was no warmth, no fear, no lingering affection. There was only the cold, hard assessment of a predator spotting wounded prey. A small, imperceptible smile touched her lips. Not a smile of joy, but the smile of a judge delivering a verdict. No, Ethan whispered, the glass slipping from his numb fingers and shattering on the floor. The sound was swallowed by the music, but the visual was stark. It's impossible. What? Sienna asked, looking at the broken glass. Ethan, what's wrong? You're pale. That's my wife, he choked out, the words tasting like ash. Sienna looked at him, then up at the billionaire heiress descending the stairs like a goddess of vengeance. That, Sienna whispered, horrifying realization dawning on her, is the plain librarian? Luna reached the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked straight toward them, the heavy velvet of her dress whispering against the floor. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough for Ethan to smell her scent. No longer the smell of old books and vanilla, but something expensive, complex, and dangerous. Oud and crushed roses. The room was silent. Everyone was watching. Luna tilted her head, her eyes boring into Ethan's soul, stripping him bare. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice smooth, dark chocolate wrapped in razor wire. "I believe you have my table, and I believe—" She glanced at Sienna, then back to him. "Wah! You're sitting in my seat." The silence that descended upon table 1, the most coveted spot in the room, was not peaceful. It was the suffocating vacuum before an explosion. Ethan stood frozen, the shattered flutes of champagne at his feet reflecting the fractured reality he was now living in. He felt naked, exposed under the glare of the chandeliers. Ethan started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, desperate to regain the composure that had been his trademark. "Luna, you look different. You look incredible." "And you look exactly the same, Ethan," Luna replied, her gaze sweeping over him with clinical indifference, noting the sweat on his brow, the fear in his eyes. Still chasing the brightest light in the room, terrified of the dark, still confusing price tags with value. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She didn't wait for him to move. She gestured to a security guard who gently but firmly guided a stunned Sienna out of the chair at the head of the table. "Hey," Sienna protested, her face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson. "That's my seat. My name card is right there. Do you know who I am?" "Actually," Luna said, picking up the card embossed with Ms. Sienna Rain, "this was placed here as a courtesy to my ex-husband's +1. But since the hostess has arrived, seating arrangements have been optimized." She dropped the card into a waiter's passing tray as if it were a used napkin. Then she sat. She didn't just sit. She occupied the space with the gravity of a monarch reclaiming a throne. She adjusted her napkin, utterly unbothered by the scene she had just caused. Ethan was left standing. The eyes of London's elite, bankers, dukes, tech moguls, were glued to him. He could feel their judgment like a physical weight. He had discarded a Vancroft for a nobody. It was the worst business decision in the history of the city, and everyone knew it. He could practically hear the stock of his reputation plummeting in real time. "Ethan!" Damian Rhodes hissed, appearing at his elbow, grabbing him tight. "There's an empty spot at table 14, near the kitchen. Take it before you make more of a scene. You are embarrassing yourself." Ethan grabbed Sienna's arm, perhaps a little too roughly, and dragged her away from the epicenter of his humiliation. As they walked the long, shameful path to the back of the room, past the smirk of competitors and the whispers of socialites, he felt like he was walking to the gallows. Did he know? He couldn't have. Look at his face. He looks like he's seen a ghost. Imagine divorcing the Vancroft fortune for that. He traded a diamond for a piece of glass. They sat at table 14, wedged between a deaf retired colonel and a nervous intern who spilled water on the tablecloth. The view of the head table was obscured by a massive floral arrangement, but Ethan could see Luna clearly. She was laughing, a sound he hadn't heard in years, with the French ambassador. She looked radiant. She looked free. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sienna hissed, stabbing her fork into her salad as if it were Ethan's heart. "You said she was a mouse. You said she was nobody. You said she wore cardigans and read boring books." "I didn't know," Ethan snapped, keeping his voice low but venomous. "She never told me. We were married for 3 years, and she never mentioned that her grandmother was Isadora Vancroft. She lived like a pauper." "She played you," Sienna sneered, taking a perverse pleasure in his pain. "She watched you struggle to build your little company while she sat on a dragon's hoard. That's sick, Ethan. That's psychopathic. She tested you, and you failed. Ethan stared at Luna. Was it sick? Or was it a test he had spectacularly failed? He remembered the nights he'd come home exhausted, complaining about cash flow, about investors. Luna would listen, make him tea, and rub his shoulders. She had offered to help with the books once, and he had laughed at her. Stick to your novels, Lou. Finance is for the big boys. God, she could have bought his company with her pocket change. She could have bought him. He watched as Luna stood up to give the keynote speech. The room fell silent instantly. For years, Luna began, her voice amplified and crystal clear, commanding the cavernous room effortlessly. The Vancroft estate is operated in the shadows. My grandmother believed that wealth should be quiet, that influence should be subtle, but silence allows weeds to grow. Her eyes flicked briefly, devastatingly, toward the back of the room, toward table 14. It allows arrogance to mistake itself for competence. It allows mediocrity to masquerade as excellence. Tonight, we step into the light, and we will be evaluating our partnerships very aggressively. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. The merger, the loans. Everything relied on the goodwill of the market, and the market just found a new queen. She wasn't just back. She was cleaning house. 2 hours later, the gala was winding down, but the air was still electric with gossip. Ethan had spent the evening trying to corner investors, but they scattered like roaches whenever he approached. He was radioactive. No one wanted to be seen talking to the man who divorced Luna Vancroft. He found Luna on the terrace. It was a private area guarded by security, but the head of security recognized Ethan and with a pitying look let him pass. Luna was standing by the railing, looking out over the Thames. The wind whipped her dark hair around her face, making her look wild and untamed, the opposite of the domestic creature he had divorced. She held a glass of red wine, looking like a deity contemplating the destruction of a city. "Why?" Ethan asked. His voice was raw. He didn't have the energy for charm anymore. "Just tell me why." Luna didn't turn around. "You'll have to be more specific, Ethan. Why am I rich? Why am I here? Or why didn't I tell you?" "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, walking closer. "We were married. We shared a bed. We shared a life. You let me worry about mortgage payments when you could have bought the whole damn block. Did you get off on it? Watching me sweat? Was I just entertainment for you?" Luna finally turned. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes dark pools reflecting the city lights. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to be sure," she said softly. "I grew up surrounded by people who wanted things from me. My name, my money, my influence. Everyone wanted a piece of Vancroft. When I met you in that coffee shop, you didn't know who I was. You liked me. You laughed at my jokes. You liked my mind. Or so I thought." "I did like you," Ethan insisted, stepping closer. "I loved you. We were happy in the beginning. You loved the idea of having someone safe," Luna corrected, her voice hardening. "Someone who wouldn't challenge you. Someone plain, who would look at you like you were the sun. But the moment you got a taste of real success, you didn't want a partner. You wanted a prop. And I wasn't shiny enough. I wasn't an accessory you could wear on your arm to impress the board. I was building a future for us. I did it all for us. No, Ethan, you were building a shrine to yourself. And you sacrificed me on the altar of your ego." She took a step closer, the scent of oud and roses enveloping him, intoxicating and terrifying. "If I had told you about the money, you never would have left. You would have stayed, and you would have bled me dry. You would have used my inheritance to fund your vanity projects, your cars, your mistresses. You would have cheated on me in secret instead of leaving me in the open. I saved myself the indignity of being your bank account." Ethan flinched. The truth of her words struck him like a physical blow. He knew, deep down, she was right. If he had known she was a Vancroft, he would have treated her like royalty, not out of love, but out of greed. "I can fix this," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. He reached for her hand, his eyes pleading. "Luna, look at us. We have history. I made a mistake. A massive, terrible mistake. But I'm still the man you married. Let me prove it. Let's start over. You and me. Think of what we could do together now. We could rule this city." Luna looked at his hand, then up at his face. For a second, Ethan saw a flicker of the old Luna, the softness, the vulnerability. Hope flared in his chest. Then she laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Oh, Ethan, you really don't get it. You think this is a negotiation. You think I'm still the girl waiting for you to come home and validate her existence. You think you can charm your way out of an execution." She pulled her hand away as if he were contagious. "I didn't come here to win you back," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "I came here to show you exactly what you threw away. You called me plain. You called me a smudge. Well, Ethan, I hope you enjoy the view from the gutter, because I'm about to buy the pavement you're standing on." "Is that a threat?" Ethan bristled, his fear turning to anger. "No," Luna said, turning back to the skyline. "It's a forecast. It's going to rain, Ethan, and you don't have an umbrella. The hangover the next morning wasn't from alcohol. It was from the adrenaline crash of total social collapse." Ethan sat in his office, the silence of the room deafening. Usually, by 9:08 a.m., his phone would be buzzing with calls from suppliers, partners, and his PR team. Today, it was silent, the silence of a tomb, except for one notification, a news alert on his tablet. Vancroft Estate announces audit of fintech sector. "Weeding out the weak," says heiress. Ethan clicked the link with trembling fingers. There was a photo of Luna from last night, looking regal and terrifying. The article detailed her plan to reevaluate the Vancroft holdings in the tech sector, specifically targeting companies with inflated valuations and unstable leadership. It was a declaration of war. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Cole?" It was his secretary, Sarah. Her voice sounded shaky, on the verge of tears. "Mr. Rhodes is on line 1. He sounds upset." Ethan picked up the phone. "Damien, listen about last night." "Shut up, Ethan," Damien cut him off. There was no warmth in his voice anymore. "I just got off the phone with the Vancroft legal team. They're calling in the bridge loan." "They can't do that." Ethan stood up, knocking his chair over. "That loan has a 5-year maturity. We have terms." "Read the fine print, you idiot. There's a clause about reputational risk to the lender. Apparently, your public meltdown last night qualifies. They want the $10 million back. By Friday." "I don't have $10 million liquid," Ethan shouted, pacing the room. "You know that. We put it all into the expansion. It's tied up in assets." "Then you're insolvent," Damien said coldly. "And since our merger was contingent on your solvency, the deal is off. My lawyers will be sending over the termination papers within the hour." "Damien, please, you can't do this. We're friends. We played golf last week." "We were associates, Ethan. And right now, you're toxic. Luna Vancroft has blacklisted you. If I stick with you, she comes after me next. Goodbye." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the receiver. In the span of 12 hours, he had gone from a rising star to a pariah. The office door opened. He expected Sarah, but it was Sienna. She was wearing sunglasses, even though it was overcast. She didn't look at him. She walked straight to the bar cart in the corner and poured herself a vodka tonic, downing half of it in one gulp. "We need to talk," she said. "Not now, Sienna." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Rhodes just pulled the merger. I have to find £10 million in 3 days or I lose the company." "Yeah, about that." Sienna took a sip, grimacing. "I'm moving out. Ethan looked up, blinking. What? I'm moving out, she repeated, turning to face him. She took off her sunglasses to reveal eyes that were puffy from crying, or perhaps from calculating. This isn't what I signed up for, Ethan. The humiliation last night? People were laughing at me. I lost 3,000 followers overnight. I was the one they were laughing at, Ethan yelled. I'm the one losing everything. My company, my reputation. Exactly, Sienna shrugged. You're losing, and I don't do losers. I stuck with you because you were going places. Now, you're going to bankruptcy court. I can't have that attached to my brand. Your brand? Ethan let out a hysterical laugh. You're an influencer with 50,000 followers. I paid for your followers. I paid for your apartment. I paid for the nose job you lied about having. And now the checks are going to bounce, Sienna said, grabbing her purse. I've already called a mover. Don't worry, I'm only taking the things you bought me. Which is, well, everything. The clothes, the jewelry, the bags. You're leaving me now? Ethan walked around the desk, his hands shaking. When I'm down, I left my wife for you, Sienna. And she turned out to be a billionaire, Sienna said, opening the door. She looked back at him, her expression not one of malice, but of simple, brutal pragmatism. You bet on the wrong horse, Ethan. Don't be mad at me for knowing when to leave the race. She slammed the door. Ethan stood in the center of his glass-walled office, the empire he had built on image and arrogance crumbling around him. He looked out the window at the London skyline. Somewhere out there, in a boardroom likely made of real mahogany rather than veneer, Luna was sitting. She hadn't just divorced him. She hadn't just humiliated him. She was erasing him. He grabbed a paperweight, a heavy chrome sphere he'd bought to look important, and hurled it at the window. It bounced off the reinforced glass with a pathetic thud and rolled under the sofa. He sank to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. For the first time in years, he thought about the small, cozy apartment he and Luna had shared when they were first married. The smell of her cheap vanilla candles, the way she used to hum when she read, the safety. He had traded a diamond for a rhinestone because the rhinestone sparkled more under the cheap lights of the club. And now he was left with nothing but dust. The end of Ethan Cole's empire didn't happen with a bang, but with the quiet, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard in a sterile legal office. It had been 1 week since the Obsidian Gala. In that time, Ethan had lost his financing, his merger partner, and his mistress. Now, he was sitting across from a team of liquidators, watching them dissect his life into recoverable assets. The penthouse is already listed, the lead attorney, a dry man named Mr. Henderson, who smelled of stale coffee, said without looking up. The Aston Martin has been repossessed by the leasing agency. We are currently evaluating the office furniture. It's a Herman Miller chair, Ethan said, his voice hollow. It cost £2,000. We'll be lucky to get $400 for it at auction, Henderson replied, scribbling on a notepad. The market is flooded with distressed office assets right now. Everyone is downsizing. Ethan slumped in his seat. He wore a suit that hadn't been dry cleaned in days. The sharp, polished tycoon of last week was gone. In his place sat a man who looked like he was shrinking inside his own clothes. His stubble was graying, his eyes bloodshot. There must be something else, Ethan pleaded. My intellectual property? The algorithm? The client list? Worthless without the capital to operate it, Henderson said. The client list has evaporated. However, there is one offer for the complete acquisition of Cole FinTech's remaining assets. Ethan perked up. An offer? From whom? How much? Henderson slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. The offer is for £1. It covers your outstanding debts to the creditors, preventing you from filing for personal bankruptcy. You walk away with nothing, but your name remains legally solvent. £1? Ethan choked out. Who is the buyer? A holding company called Veritas LLC. Ethan stared at the name. Veritas. Truth. He knew exactly who was behind it. It wasn't just a business acquisition. It was a message. She was buying his life's work for the price of a chocolate bar. Not because she wanted it, but because she could. She was clearing the board. She was taking the last thing he had. "Take it," Ethan whispered, signing the paper. The stroke of the pen felt heavy, final. As he walked out of the office and onto the gray London street, his phone buzzed. It wasn't a business call. It was a notification from a tabloid app. Exclusive. The Rise and Fall of Ethan Cole by Sienna Rain. Ethan froze. He opened the article. There, in vivid, sensational detail, was everything. Sienna had sold him out. She described his vanity, his obsession with status, his mockery of his plain ex-wife. She painted herself as a naive victim of his manipulation and him as a sociopathic climber who discarded people like tissues. She included screenshots of his texts. He stood on the street corner, people bustling past him. Some glanced at him, a flicker of recognition in their eyes, followed by a sneer. He wasn't just broke. He was a national joke. He walked to the nearest trash can and dropped his phone inside. He didn't want to read the comments. He turned up his collar against the drizzle and began the long walk to the only place he had left. A small, damp studio apartment in Zone 4 that he had rented under his mother's maiden name. The climb to the top had taken him 10 years. The fall had taken 10 days. The Vancroft Estate Library was a cathedral of silence. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held centuries of knowledge, and a fire crackled in the oversized hearth. It was the kind of room Ethan would have killed to own. A room that smelled of history and power. Luna sat in a leather armchair, a cup of tea cooling on the side table. In her lap was the acquisition contract for Cole Fintech. Price, Ours. She should have felt triumphant. This was the moment the Count of Monte Cristo lived for. She had crushed the man who broke her. She had stripped him of his pride, his wealth, and his status. She had won. But as she stared at the signature, Ethan Cole, shaky and uneven, she didn't feel joy. She felt tired. "Is it done?" Luna looked up. Her grandmother's old lawyer, Arthur, stood in the doorway. He was the only one who had known about her marriage, the only one who had warned her against keeping her identity a secret. "It's done," Luna said quietly. He signed. "He's out." "And the ex-mistress?" "Paid for her story," Luna said, a hint of distaste in her voice. "Sienna Rain is currently trending on Twitter. She thinks she's won, but she's just exposed herself as a mercenary. Society will eat her alive in 6 months. She'll be a footnote in a cautionary tale." Arthur walked over and sat opposite her. "You don't look like a victor, Luna." "I thought I would feel lighter," she admitted. "I thought watching him lose everything would validate me. It would prove that I was the prize he missed. But looking at this," she tapped the paper, "it just looks like tragedy. He was so desperate to be someone, Arthur. And I fed that desperation. I hid who I was because I wanted to be loved for me. But in doing so, I let him believe he was better than me. I set the trap. He walked into it willingly," Arthur reminded her gently. "He chose cruelty. He chose betrayal. You didn't force him to leave you. You didn't force him to humiliate you." "I know," Luna sighed, standing up and walking to the window. The vast grounds of the estate stretched out before her, manicured and perfect. "But destroying him doesn't fix what broke in me. I'm still the girl who wasn't enough." "You are Luna Vancroft," Arthur said firmly. "You are enough for 1,000 lifetimes. The question is, what will you do now? You've cleared the weeds, as you said. What will you plant?" Luna looked at her reflection in the glass. She saw the designer clothes, the perfect hair, the jewelry. It was armor, just like Ethan's beige penthouse was armor. I'm done destroying things, she said, turning back to Arthur. Liquidate Coal FinTech. Sell off the assets and donate the proceeds to the literacy fund. I don't want his company. I don't want his ghost haunting my ledger. And Ethan? Arthur asked. Do we pursue him for the remaining legal fees? Luna looked at the fire. She remembered a night, years ago, when Ethan had come home with a cheap bouquet of carnations, because he'd remembered she had a bad day. It was a rare moment of kindness in a sea of ambition. No, she said softly. Let him go. He has his punishment. He has to live with himself. 1 year later. The bell above the door of the Dusty Spine bookstore chimed softly. It was a Tuesday afternoon, usually a slow time, which suited the manager just fine. He was in the back, unpacking a box of new releases. He wore a beige apron over a flannel shirt, his sleeves rolled up. His hands, once manicured and soft, were rougher now, stained with ink and dust. Ethan? The owner, Mrs. Higgins, called out. Customer asking for the new historical fiction section. Coming, Ethan called back. He walked onto the floor, wiping his hands on a rag. He had aged in the last year. His hair was graying at the temples, and the shark-like hunger in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, resigned stillness. He lived in a small flat above the shop. He took the bus. He read books. He was, for the first time in his life, a nobody. And to his utter shock, he slept better than he ever had in the penthouse. There were no margins to meet, no investors to impress, just stories. He pointed the customer to the correct aisle and began to tidy a display table near the front window. Outside, the London rain was falling in sheets, washing the city gray. A black town car pulled up to the curb. Ethan stiffened. He knew that car. He had coveted a car like that once. The back door opened, and an umbrella was snapped open. A woman stepped out. It was her. Luna didn't come into the shop. She stood on the sidewalk, looking at the window display. She was wearing a trench coat, simple and elegant. She looked happy. Not the manic, high-powered happiness of the gala, but a deep, settled content. She was looking at the book in the window, a debut novel titled The Glass Ceiling, written by an anonymous author. Ethan held his breath. He was standing just behind the glass. If she looked up, she would see him. He wanted to run. He wanted to hide in the back room. The shame was still there, a dull ache in his chest. But he didn't move. He stood his ground. He owed her that much. Luna looked up. Her eyes met his through the rain-streaked glass. Time seemed to suspend. Ethan waited for the look of triumph, the sneer, the pity. He waited for her to point and laugh, to come in and buy the store just to fire him. But she didn't. Her expression was soft. There was no anger left. She looked at him, really looked at him, and gave a barely perceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was acknowledgement. I see you. You survived. I survived. Then she turned and got back into the car. The engine purred, and the vehicle slipped away into the traffic, disappearing into the gray city. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked down at the book in his hands. It was a classic he had refused to read when they were married, calling it boring sentimental trash. He opened it to the first page. "Ethan?" Mrs. Higgins asked from the counter. "You okay, love? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ethan looked out at the empty street where the heiress had been. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that didn't reach his eyes but settled comfortably in his heart. "No, Mrs. Higgins," he said quietly. "Not a ghost, just an old acquaintance." He closed the book and placed it gently on the shelf. "I'm going to take my break now," he said. "I think I'm going to read for a while." He walked to the back of the shop, the smell of old paper and vanilla candles surrounding him. It wasn't a billion-dollar empire. It wasn't a penthouse in the sky. It was small and plain and quiet. But for the first time in his life, it was enough. The story of Ethan and Luna isn't just about money or revenge. It's a mirror held up to the lies we tell ourselves about worth. Ethan chased a reflection of power, destroying the only real thing he had, only to find that the gold he sought was just painted lead. Luna, forced to reclaim her voice, learned that true power isn't about how loudly you roar, but how firmly you stand in your own truth. In the end, they both found exactly what they deserved. Luna found her crown, and Ethan found his humanity. Sometimes, you have to lose the whole world to find your own soul. What a journey! If this story hit you right in the feels, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What do you think? Did Ethan deserve a second chance, or did he get off too easy? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about betrayal, karma, and sweet revenge, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.